Good afternoon. My talk today is about a part of the Great Australian Bight research program, and that part was dedicated to the identification of biologically important area in the GAB. The GAB program was a collaboration between different organizations, BP, the CSIRO, SARDI, the University of Adelaide, and Flinders University. And this program aimed to provide a maximum of information on the environment, economic and social value of the GAB region. And before to start, I'd like to acknowledge Simon, Paul, Alice, Jan, Mark, and Toby, who were largely involved in this work. So with increasing human activities in the GAB region, there is a urgent need to identify and understand the importance of ecologically sensitive areas and how human activity overlap and impact natural processes. However, biological data in this region are scarce and patchy because they simply remain particularly difficult to collect in the marine environment. And that is a critical issue for a decision maker. We need information to proceed. And one possible method to overcome this data deficiency is to use different species as key indicators. And the top consumers in marine food web, like seabirds, sharks, cetaceans, or pinnipeds, for example, can provide information on the entire system and offer opportunities to detect and assess these changes in biological and physical environmental parameters. Of course, the study of just one species can be valuable and interesting to get some information on the ecosystem. But integrating information from a multitude of species takes this approach further, providing a broader picture of the ecosystem functioning, especially by identifying regions of high, medium, or low use by predators communities. So the GAB region has been identified as a critical habitat for a range of apex predator species. This is, for example, the GAB is the Australian largest calving and nursing aggregation for southern right whales. This is also the feeding aggregation of pygmy blue whales, for example, and most of the Australian population of long-nosed fur seals and Australian sea lions can be found in the GAB region. So we know for a long time that the GAB attracts a lot of predators, but basic information on the distribution of many of these iconic species is limited, hampering our understanding of why this region is so important to these species. So the objective of this project was first to identify high-use areas and key regions of distribution and interspecific overlap. And the second objective was to try to relate these key regions to biological and physical oceanographic features. So to address these objectives, we used a huge data set. It was about 5,000 tracks and about 16,000 observations or sightings from 11 species that came from different sources and different studies. And there is a lot of information in that table, but it's just to illustrate the heterogeneity and the complexity of the data set. We have got different species. We have got, as I said, tracking and sightings. The time period covered by the data just ran over like 20 years. And we have got different sample size depending on the species. And we try to take into account this complexity when we selected the method to develop the distribution model. And after different tests, the maxed method, the maximum entropy model method was finally chosen as a preferred method to model the species distribution and the habitat selection, just because it was suitable for all the data from all the species. So yeah, I don't have time to present in details the results for each of the species, but I've just selected 2 examples as an illustration. So the first one is for Australian sea lions. And for that species, we have got a pretty good data set with tracking data for both males and females from a large proportion of their breeding colony in the Gab region. So here you can see the tracks for sea lions. And from there, and using different environmental covariables, we estimated the overall potential distribution of the species by including all available location data. So you can see here the predicted probability of distribution of sea lions over the continental shelf in the Gab region, which represents the suitable habitats for the species. And the red part of this map are the highest probability of distribution, or the most suitable habitat, predicted habitat for the species. Here is another example, just based on the sighting data collected for the sperm whales. And again, we estimated the potential distribution of the species by including all this observation. And the suitable habitat for the species appear to be located over the continental slope and the marine canyons. So we did that for all the species, but we also used the maximum of available information for all of the species, and we try to refine the initial distribution model. And for example, we just corrected the distribution model by the weighted abundance for the central place forager, like sea lions, fur seals, and some seabirds. So for that, we use the population estimate for these colonies. We estimate the potential foraging habitat and not just the global distribution, the general distribution for the species. And when it was possible, we developed separate sex or season models where the data were available. We finally overlapped the maps of predicted probabilities obtained for each species. And although there is a spectrum of use by predator species from low to high in the Gab region, we just define 3 categories of use to facilitate the interpretation of the results. So we have got the high use, medium use, and low use region. As I said before, I don't have time to present all the results, but we also explore, based on the different model we had, we explore different combination of distribution overlapping, the general distribution weighted by abundance, the potential foraging habitats for the different species, and again, the foraging habitat weighted by the abundance when it was available. Then we did sometimes additional subdivision, only considering a category, a group of species like the central place forager or the non-central place forager, the migratory species. And when it was possible, we also consider the seasonality in the movement of the animals. And one general result was that 2 different regions of the Gab were selected as key regions of interest. That means highly used by the predators. And the first one is located over the continental shelf and shelf break in the eastern Gab. So on the right of the map in red, extending along the Bonny coast and the mainland coast north to Tasmania. And the second one is located over the continental shelf and shelf break in the western Gab, so on the left on that map. We then extracted some physical parameters in these in these key regions, and the color of the curves just match the color of that map. And we are just here interested in the red curve because it's like the key region. And although the key regions share the similar physical characteristic as they are located in relatively narrow shelf waters in the vicinity of the shelf slope, as indicated by the bathymetry at the top, the distance from the coast in the middle, or the distance from the slope at the bottom. They are also influenced by different oceanographic processes known to occur in this part of the Gab region. So in summer, the region number 1 is characterized by an upwelling system, by different upwelling systems that bring cool and nutrient-rich water to the surface in summer, and is represented the sea surface temperature, the mean surface temperature in February. So you can see 2 different upwelling regions along the Bonny Coast and along the Western Eyre Peninsula. Thank you. The region number 2 is influenced by the low-wind current, which is a warm current that originates in tropical waters, with the strongest flow occurring during winter in the Gab. So as a conclusion, we can say that this study represents the first regional integration of tracking and survey data available for many species of marine predators in the Gab, and the main outcome of the project is a clear identification of key regions in the Gab highly used by the predators. And these regions, the biologically important region identified, appear to be underpinned by the unique and complex oceanographic features of the region. And this study, and it's especially the identification of assemblage of multi-species of predators, provide a valuable approach for determining important marine habitats, identifying conservation priorities, and developing conservation and management policy. This is indeed the first stepping stone, the baseline to identify any potential interaction with economic activities like fisheries, oil and gas exploration, or to assess the relevance of protected areas, or again to assess the effect of climate change on predators' communities and the marine ecosystem in general. So that's it. This study would not have been possible without the contribution of many people who have collected the data over the last 20 years from several studies and research programs, and I'd like to acknowledge all this person just here in this slide. So thank you.